You're listening to the Place Northwest podcast, your digital resource for the latest insight and analysis on all things property in the northwest of England. Listen when you want, where you want.
Hello and welcome to this Place Northwest podcast. I'm your host, Dan Whelan. This podcast is brought to you in collaboration with MTX Contracts. MTX is a construction and engineering company based in Wilmslow in Cheshire, which specialises in the off-site construction of buildings for a variety of healthcare clients, including the NHS. Today, I'm pleased to say that I'm joined by David Hartley, Managing Director at MTX. Hello, David.
Hello, Dan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Yes, good. In the back bedroom, working from home, probably like much of the nation right now.
Absolutely. How's that been treating you?
Good, actually. I'm okay up here on my own. I suppose it's the homeschooling that brings the challenge. So occasionally dipping in and out of that, but all good. Can't complain.
Fantastic. Great to hear. Okay, so we're going to be talking a little bit about MTX today and what you've got going on at the moment. But in a little while, we're going to talk about the current climate and how that is impacting on MTX as a business. But first of all, for the people listening today, how about you give us a little rundown of what MTX does and what MTX is as a company?
Okay, so MTX, it was established in 2002 by my father and myself, later joined by my brother Stephen. We were initially focused on projects serving the NHS, small remodelling, refurbishment projects, particularly operating theatres or areas that required a high level of mechanical and electrical engineering and coordination. In parallel with that, there is a part of the business which serves the fresh produce sector in the construction of temperature-controlled ripening facilities for expensive produce such as bananas and avocados, which is still it still remains part of our business, albeit it's relatively small now in comparison to the work that we do for the healthcare facilities. Our focus is actually on modern methods of construction. We hear that word being used a lot at the moment, but as I say, we focus on modern methods of construction, and that's off-site construction, where we are able to deliver buildings in a very fast time period. Particularly suited to hospitals where we want to keep disruption down, keep vehicle movements down, as I say, disruption to a minimum. So we work nationally, albeit we do a lot of projects within the Northwest. And this year our revenues will exceed £50 million.
Okay, fantastic. Interesting to hear a little bit about your company then. And as you mentioned, it's a family affair. So your dad and yourself founded it, and then your brother joined later on. How is that sort of working with your family?
Absolutely fabulous. I mean, I have to say it's probably like all family businesses, they have their moments, but my father particularly, over the years, nearing on 20 years now, I've worked with him for a long time, as has my brother, and he really has been a fabulous mentor during that period. Initially, when we set up the business, he was the figurehead of that business. In more recent times, there's been a lot more responsibility on primarily myself and, of course, my brother. In addition to the rest of the senior team, there are a number of other directors who support us. The key is for any family business is to keep talking and if there's a problem, iron it out there and then, and try not to take your work home.
Absolutely. Good advice for anybody, I think. Now, your motto is innovation in construction. Could you tell us exactly what that means?
Yes, we are very, very different to a standard construction company. Okay, whilst we build very, very compliant facilities, the guidelines typically are HDM and HBN guidelines, which is what the NHS and, for that matter, the private health sector use in terms of guides of how buildings should be constructed. Um, our buildings are, of course, in line and very, very compliant. They comply with planning conditions, they comply with building regulations, and often our buildings have a design life up to 60 years. But in answer to your question, what makes us different? We are an innovative company, and every single building that we get involved with, we're looking at it from a different point of view in terms of construction. Um, we won't build buildings. I say we won't. It's very, very rare that we would build buildings using, typical substructure, foundations with a brick or timber built frame. Our buildings are built off site. So, the advantage generally with modern methods of construction is that your substructure, your foundation, is being constructed at the same time that your superstructure is being constructed in a factory environment. And those two activities run in parallel. So whether it's a volumetric building that we construct, whether it's building constructed out of light steel frame or SIPS panels, the substructure and the superstructure, it's a parallel activity. Okay. Whereas a traditional building, um, one activity has to take place after the next. So, for example, you'd construct the foundations, and then when the foundations are completed, the structural steel frame or the concrete frame is constructed in situ after that event. But the advantage that we have is that, as I touched on earlier, there are very, very big advantages with speed. The buildings are constructed in a factory environment, which makes, or rather ensures, that we've got very, very high quality of installation, quality controlled. We keep all the activities, or say all, a majority of the activities away from that busy hospital environment, which basically allows the operations um, on existing hospital sites to be kept as least disruptive as possible. When we do deliver the building, they typically take between 2 and 3 weeks to actually install. But the moment that activity happens, very, very quickly, you've got an established, weather-tight building to be able to complete the fit out, the MEP engineering services, and ultimately the commissioning to allow the occupation to take place. So, going back to the beginning, innovation in construction, it's what makes us different. It's a very, very different. Whilst we construct buildings out of metal, steel, wood, plasterboard, we are providing compliant buildings, but they are constructed in a very, very different manner.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting there. You mentioned about the speed aspect, and that must be a USP for a company like MTX, and especially at the moment, the current climate. I guess that need for speed is heightened even more so.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, speed, particularly with the NHS, is always, I say always, 99% of the time, it's a requirement. Um, of course, the NHS was never designed to do what the NHS does now. It's an incredible service, but in the last 75 years since its conception, the NHS, in terms of what it is able to offer the population, is absolutely fabulous. But the science has progressed, beyond belief in terms of what our doctors and how we are treated as patients. And of course, with that science, an aging population, the landscape of hospitals is forever changing in terms of the requirement. I know, whilst I accept, and many architects and healthcare planners would agree, there is always a need for a core structure of a hospital building. in terms of the elements around the peripheral of the building, in terms of the services that are required, um, such as, whether it be orthopedic surgery for replacement hips and knees, or certain treatments for certain cancers, that science and the way patients are treated is constantly evolving. And as such, off-site construction is able to respond very, very quickly to that requirement and that demand. And often our buildings, of course, because of the flexibility of them, the way that, because they are constructed off-site, you're able to reutilize that space somewhere else in another part of the site to provide a different duty, a different service should the original service expire. And often, again, we've put our buildings on different hospitals, so there is flexibility, a lot of flexibility there.
Okay, great. You touched on it before. You mentioned operating theatres. What other kind of facilities do you provide?
So we build an awful lot of operating theatres, and operating theatres come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. There are orthopaedic operating theatres, clearly responsible for orthopaedic procedures, as I say, hip replacement, knee surgery, the list goes on. Ophthalmic theatres, and then there are other specialist operating theatres specific to different kinds of diseases. Um, but in addition to that, we get involved currently we're actually building over 400 beds for the NHS around the country. There is always a big requirement for bed space, and there always will be. In addition to that, we are involved in a lot of extensions to accident and emergency facilities. Endoscopy facilities is a big topic at the moment. In addition to critical care units, intensive care units. But the common denominator with all those facilities is that there is a high level of mechanical and electrical engineering and coordination that goes into the construction of those buildings. Do we get involved in offices? Not really. Occasionally we will do. But our model is we've always got to add value to our be able to add value to our clients whenever we're providing a product, because if we're not there, we're not going to be competitive, and clearly it'd be better going somewhere else, which again we're happy to support them with that decision if that's the direction they wish to go in.
Yeah. If I was inside one of these buildings, and hopefully I won't be by the sound of it, would I be
I
able to
hope
tell
not.
that it was? Would I be able to tell that it was constructed off-site, or does it appear to the naked eye as if it's just another building?
Dan, that's a really, really good question, and I'm very pleased that you've brought it up. There is a perception. Unfortunately, that perception is changing, but there is a perception that an off-site solution isn't as robust as a permanent traditional build. Um, I've been involved in this kind of construction now for at least 15 years, and along that time developed a number of new um, and innovative technologies, construction techniques to allow us to get to where we are in this day and age. And I'm not just one; I'm one of hundreds of different people that are involved in this particular sector. But these buildings are. I touched on it before. They're constructed out of steel. They are designed by structural engineers who are also the same people that are responsible for designing 50, 60-story tower blocks. They incorporate concrete. They have glazed paneling. If you want one of our buildings to look like the Shard, it can do. Answer to your question, when you're inside the buildings, we build, often our buildings have solid concrete floors. So there's a suggestion that offsite buildings sometimes have bouncy floors. Well, no, because they've got to comply to certain regulations. They have plasterboard walls. I mean, in healthcare, all of the walls we construct are double lined with the appropriate acoustic um, acoustics applied to it. They have laying grid ceilings. Of course, they have windows. And something else to expand on that is that often we receive inquiries for a building which has been designed in a traditional format by an architect, and because of the speed in which we can deliver, an alternative route is explored, going down the off-site route. And what we're able to do is that, in terms of our module sizes, we're able to modularize the grid around an existing layout, to ensure that we get a like for like footprint, with no compromise on the layout. So, no, absolutely, our buildings, I hope, Dan, that you don't get to go in one, but you would know, and in fact, whether it be yourself or another patient, there is no difference. And I would challenge anybody, inside or out, to be able to tell that our building was um, a modular building. It's purely
Right.
constructed in a different way.
That's great. Well, that's good to hear. That's very very reassuring. Um, in terms of, I would like to get an idea of what one of your factories looks like. Where you assemble, where you construct these modular units. Can you give the listeners an idea of how that works? Construction within a factory, because I think when people think construction, they have a very ingrained vision of what that looks like. So could you tell us a little bit about what it looks like inside one of those factories?
Yeah, we work with a number of factories, and in fact, it's one of our USPs. Early days, to be involved in modular construction, you needed your own factory. Well, actually, it's become a massive uh, golden thread of ours, because we work with 5 factories, all of which produce our buildings to the same standard, which we define and scope. Each of those, again, just to be clear on that, the reason why we do that is because there is a constant demand within the NHS for these buildings. And quite honestly, given our revenues, we wouldn't have enough factory space alone, if we had our own factory, to be able to construct all of those buildings at the same time and possibly deal with the ongoing demand. So as a result, we chose to work with several factories who would construct our buildings on uh, on our behalf, and that basically means that on every project we are able to market test against those 5 factories to make sure, dependent upon their levels of demand, we're able to get the best price. And secondly, we make sure that we get the best program that can be shared with our clients to ensure that they're getting best value. And of course, it means that we can deliver in the quickest possible period to ensure that our ultimate client gets their facility in the quickest possible time. So, what does that factory environment look like, in answer to your original question? Well, the structural steel is actually manufactured away from the factories often, um, in a by a steel fabricator who will construct or fabricate that steel, um, in line with the structural engineers and of course current European guidance. Um, they will then be transported to the factory environment for assembly. The structural steel modules, will be uh, brought together um, in the yard, or the various yard, where you basically pulling all the steel together, bolting them together, putting the floor plates in. They will then go into the factory, and then, depend upon the external finish of that building, they would be applied in addition to the internal partitions at the various stages. Um, the MEP services, so all the wall conduits, all the pipe work, any data, electrical systems, are all with uh, installed within the walls, and even IPS units, sanitary ware, fitted furniture, dependent upon where the program sits in terms of the availability of that FF&E. We try and do as much in the factory as possible. Now, those buildings, those individual models, for the benefit of everybody listening, those modules, you know, are, are much aligned to Lego blocks. Okay, and you'd have a number of Lego blocks um, that are probably at any one time within a factory, probably 8 at a time, working their way through down a production line, and at different stages. Clearly, at the beginning of the production line, um, the the um, the amount of work, it's more structural building, but the further down that production line we go, the more finishes that we're able to achieve in terms of that looking like more like a finished building. When it pops out of that production line, it is wrapped in recycled plastic and stored until such time that we can deliver the building, which can range from anything from 10 modules up to it's infinite, but at this stage we're on what 160 modules is probably the largest delivery we've ever made.
Right. Okay. You mentioned there about recycled plastic that you use to wrap them in when they're finished on the production line. With that in mind, is this are modern methods of construction more environmentally friendly than traditional methods of construction?
100%, yes. I mean, there's been a lot of research done um, because buildings are constructed within a factory environment. There is a lot more opportunity for recycling, such as all of our factories. There are numerous sections for recycling. So plasterboard, wood, steel. They're all it is all closely monitored, um, and the opportunity, as I say, to recycle is far, far greater. Clearly, when buildings, or traditionally when buildings are constructed in situ on site, um, that opportunity for recycling is limited, given the environments, often very, very tight environments in which the building's being constructed in.
With the factories in mind and addressing the elephant in the room, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, um, how easy has it been for those factories to adapt to the social distancing requirements? And how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted on MTX as a business?
I mean, it's fair to say. I mean, and I probably speak on behalf of the whole of the construction industry. It's been a challenge to say the least, and very much we have been guided by um, central government in terms of what we can and can't do. On a number of occasions, we have been issued, and in fact, the industry has been uh, issued with safe operating procedures, which is the government's recommendation in terms of how our factories and construction sites are best operated given the current pandemic. Um, Clearly, whether it be in a factory or on a site, we follow those safe operating procedures, which include such things as people travelling to work separately. All of our canteens, and that includes working on site also, they have been closed, which stops clearly the congregation of people. On the sites, there is a 2 metre rule where all operatives must remain at least 2 metres away from one another. And again, that applies to the factory. There are a number of other rules that we have abided by. Now, when we first heard of the proposal for a lockdown, particularly the first 48 hours, it was you know, alarming to say the least, in terms of how are we going to get through this, not necessarily financially, but in terms of we want to continue to serve our clients. Now, particularly the NHS, were delivering bed spaces, 400 bed spaces over at this time. And it was absolutely essential that we continued and kept that momentum going. Um, we've had instruction from every single one of the chief executives of the trust that we were working on that we are an extension of the key workers that are supporting the NHS. Now, clearly, we're not on the front line, but we have a big part to play in, ensuring that we're providing bed spaces in the quickest possible time. Our supply chain, in conjunction with our own activities, have been absolutely tremendous, and I applaud everybody in terms of the can-do attitude, in terms of coming together and the camaraderie between people to ensure that we continue to deliver, and that continues to be the case. Um, it's phenomenal what we've achieved, and even now I would say I hope that we are starting to slowly come out of it. And even now, one of the biggest challenges was the supplies. So it wasn't necessarily the workforce, it was the suppliers supporting the implementation of deliveries of products to allow us to construct, and even that's coming online. Um, with to support the safe distances on site, we've actually also split shifts. So on all of our sites, we have at least 2 shifts, ensuring that we've got continuity of delivery whilst safe separation. So no, I'm pleased to say that it has been a success, and clearly, I'd use this opportunity to thank everybody who supported us.
Absolutely. And I think that camaraderie that you mentioned, that's something that we've noticed from speaking to people within the construction community over the last few weeks. It's amazing how everybody has pulled together. Something else that they mentioned was, which I think you just alluded to there, was the shortage of materials. Is that something that's impacted MTX at all?
No, it's not. I mean, no, to say it's not in its entirety wouldn't be the whole truth. There has been a number of glitches, but fortunately, we've been able to manage those glitches with some of the good things that we did early on. Such as when we start to saw the pips squeaking, if you like, we ensured that we had those supplies that we were required delivered to site. So an example of that would be the ironmongery for a particular project. We understood that there potentially in the future there may be a problem, so we ensured that was all procured to ensure that it was in stock, which would, mitigate any future challenge. Um, there's been certain issues with flooring. The vinyl flooring that we use within the healthcare facilities predominantly is, it's often imported from overseas. There were a number of things that were implemented early doors to ensure that disruption has been minimised. Now, as I say, I hope that we're through the worst of this, and as I say, things are coming online. But no, it seems to be okay for now.
Okay, brilliant. Moving away from COVID-19 for a little bit, I'd like you to tell us about some of your projects, past projects in the Northwest.
Yeah, well, more recently, I mean, just certainly within the last 12 months, we completed a project, a twin orthopaedic operating theatre facility at the Royal Bolton Hospital. Um, in addition to that, actually in parallel with that, the original project, we constructed a new A&E facility, which was basically providing the hospital with a number of additional consulting rooms to support their A&E department. More recently, and in fact, it's just been commissioned in Wythenshawe. We've completed a new research and development laboratory for a large scientific testing organisation. As I say, that's a project that's just been handed over. And in fact, another springs to mind is a project at Manchester Royal Infirmary. Ironically, it was a MRI at the Manchester Royal Infirmary. Again, that's just recently been completed, which clearly gives them further facilities to treat patients. I suppose, and ongoing, actually, we're currently constructing an operating theatre for a private client in Salford, which is good. And in addition to that, we're working on various pre-construction designs for various clients around the Northwest region, including one for a school in Salford that we're looking at doing. In fact, construction's likely to commence within the next couple of weeks. In addition, for another healthcare project that we're working on in Bury. But all of those projects, yes, I wish there were more, but all of those projects are within the Northwest. But of course, our services extend. We're currently several projects around London. We're working in Norwich, Leicester, Hereford, and even Kent. So, whilst, as I say, we've got a keen preference to work within the Northwest, our activities extend nationally, as they have done for nearly 2 decades now.
Yeah, you gave us a good mix there of examples of jobs for the public sector, the NHS, and the private sector. I'm interested to know what the proportion of your jobs are for the private and for the public sector. Is it a 50-50 split or what?
No, the majority of our work, I would say that it's 85% of our revenues will come from the NHS. The remaining 15 coming from the private sector.
Okay. One of those projects you mentioned was the Oakland Hospital in Salford, which is actually very close to where I live. So I'm delighted to hear that they will be incorporating modern methods of construction to minimise noise aggravation for me while I'm working from home. So delighted to hear about
Yes.
that. Moving on then, looking ahead, obviously you mentioned there you hope that we're moving away from the current climate now. Things are likely going to be very different after the COVID-19 pandemic. What do you predict for MTX as a company, but also for similar companies that incorporate these modern methods of construction? What's the future look like for them?
The future's very, very exciting. I mean, I suppose I can answer that twofold. I mean, prior to this tragic pandemic, the government gave a clear instruction, and this was central government gave a clear instruction to government departments, the 5 government departments, that off-site construction should be assumed the construction solution of choice for the future unless proven otherwise. Okay, so the government's given our sector a clear, the clients rather, a clear mandate that they are to push the modern methods of construction route because of the very benefits that exist. And we've seen that momentum pick up within the last couple of years since that. And I honestly believe that, and I'm not suggesting for one moment that, traditional construction, is not the correct way. There is always going to be a way when, bricks and sticks and, concrete, large steel construction, steel frame construction is going to be the preferred choice. But it is clear that in the environments that we're constructing, that the modern methods construction has many advantages. So it is on the up in a significant way, which is good. But in terms of the coming out of the pandemic, as I say, which I hope we are slowly coming out of it, the world will be a very, very different place. And both, unfortunately, for the negatives, in addition to the positives that have come out of it. In terms of certainly on the negative side, it's tragic. The amount of people that have unfortunately lost their lives. But in terms of the way that the construction industry operates, I think, and other sectors for that matter, I think there are going to be many positives, such as the way that people have been able to quickly adapt to working from home without the need to be able to get in a vehicle or get on a train or get on a plane to do their job. And I think that is going to have a massive, a positive change on the way in which um, we all work. I mean, for the short term, medium term, I do hope that clients, whether it be within the NHS or education or other sectors, I really hope that there continues to be momentum and an appetite to invest and to ensure that that this country continues to succeed. Because of course, the if we look at our supply chain, we have 50 directly employed staff. Um, Down the line, if you look at any of, or rather, combined sites, any one time, we've probably 500-600 people working for us. And then, in addition to our supply chain providing products and services, just our business alone is responsible for the livelihood of so many people. And that message really does need coming from driving from the top, in terms of we must continue and we must push on in terms of ensuring that as a country we continue to remain productive.
Fantastic. David, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast and learning all about MTX. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Good to talk to you.
Thank you for tuning in to this Place Northwest podcast. A special thanks goes to David Hartley, Managing Director of MTX Contracts. If you want to learn more about MTX, you can do so by visiting their website. We do hope you can join us on our next Place Northwest podcast. I've been your host, Dan Whelan. Thank you very much.